Okay, that's 1 o'clock. So I'm going to start reading this, and I'm going to read the camera here. So if anybody joins, as always, if anybody joins the Zoom meeting, I'll renegotiate exactly what I'm doing. But I'm going to carry on just reading through this chapter. And apologies for my dishwasher. If anybody's seen my post about Zanussi's law, yeah, dishwasher in full flow. Chapter ship. Never ignore the pirate ship. A major danger to any project is the refusal of the people involved in the project to recognize and acknowledge its problems. If the team acknowledges the project's problems, this is the other thing, is that if there's an issue, I'll hold up my hand like that and say edit. Can't believe there's still issues with this. If the team acknowledges the project's problems, the team can fix the ones that can be fixed and figure out how to manage, escalate, or work around the ones that can't. One of the great things about living in London is that you can sign up for all sorts of classes. Over the past 10 years, I've signed up for comedy improvisation classes many times. Every time I go, I learn something. I have new experiences, and these often turn out to be useful in real life. The big idea in improvisation is to avoid what's called blocking. For example, an improvised scene starts with someone knocking on a door. The scene might go something like this. Jen, miming opening a door. Ben, hello, I brought you a cabbage. In the language of improv, the cabbage is an offer. It's something that Ben has come up with for the improvisers to play with. And so the right way for Jen to respond is to accept the offer and continue to play. Jen, brilliant. I always wanted to make kimchi. Or Jen, it's bring your own bottle, Ben, not bring your own brassica. Even though one of these responses is positive and one of these is negative, both responses are good because Jen accepts that Ben has brought a cabbage and builds on it. What's regarded as a bad response in improv is a response like this. That's not a cabbage, it's a balloon. Or, fine, whatever. In improv terms, this is called blocking. Jen isn't dealing with what Ben's saying. She's denying it or saying that something completely different is happening. Blocking is an important concept in improvisation because blocking kills the story. It's boring for an audience to watch, and it can take subtle forms. Imagine that there are a group of performers on stage for an improvised scene. To start a scene, the actors ask for a suggestion from the audience. Someone in the audience suggests the deck of a tall ship. Here's what might happen. Kevin, putting mind fake telescope to eye. Look over there. On the horizon, there's a ship and a flag. It's a skull and crossbones. Now the other performers have a choice to make. One obvious choice here is to yes and to accept the pirate ship. Janice, oh my God, the pirates are coming. Haul up the sails. Let's try to outrun them. Lena, oh my God, pirates are coming. The cannons, load the cannons. May, oh my God, the pirates are coming. Quick, hide in the lifeboats. All of these are good selections. Of course, the audience hope that hiding in the lifeboats won't work, but will result in lots of comedy. They certainly hope that the ship can't outrun the pirates. Agreed activity. All these improvisers are accepting the offer in the language of improvisation. But sometimes in this kind of situation, someone makes a different kind of suggestion, something like this. Nina, hey, let's wash the decks. Oliver, Pam, Quentin, Rana, and Shug. Yes, let's. Okay, maybe there's a kind of comedy in completely ignoring the obvious threat. And for the performers on the stage, this can seem like a good thing to do. But this is just another form of blocking. And for the audience, it's a very bad idea. Once somebody mentions the pirate ship, the audience wants to see it. They want to see a chase between this ship and the pirate ship. They want to see if this crew can load a cannon, point it in the right direction and fire it. They want to see the pirate king or queen and see what they'll do to the crew members who are hiding in the lifeboats. They want to see a plank walking scene. What they don't want to see are multiple improvisers on the stage. miming mopping the floor. Improvisers who don't have a lot of experience are tempted to do something like scrub the decks. It feels preferable to dealing with the implications of the pirate ship. Why? Because carrying on doing what you're doing feels safe. Doing something different feels dangerous. And for this reason, especially in situations where they feel that others are looking at them, no one wants to be changed. That was the realization of the theatrical innovator Keith Johnston. Sorry, just checking to see if nobody's joined. That was the realization of the theatrical innovator Keith Johnston, who developed his own style of improvised theatre starting in the 1950s. He also wrote several books, Impro and Impro for Storytellers. In his books, Johnston talks about people who are new to improvisation. He describes them wanting to do safe, repetitive activities. Washing the decks is an example of this. He refers to this as an agreed activity. Agreed activity is a repetitive, often group action that can plausibly fit within the scene but doesn't move the scene. That should be move the scene forward. And doesn't result in anyone or anything about the story being changed. He explains that putting people on a stage in front of an audience makes them scared, and scared people try to make themselves safe, not necessarily consciously. They try to make themselves safe, even if what they're doing is making the group less safe, even if it undermines their collective aims. In the case of improvised theatre, that means even if what they do bores the audience, which is the absolute opposite of what they're supposed to be doing on stage. Part of the skill of being a good improviser is knowing how to dodge this need to stay safe. Instead, good improvisers have the courage to move the story forward by accepting an offer, by letting something interesting happen, by being changed. When they hear the suggestion, the offer, of a pirate ship, good improvisers accept that there's a pirate ship. They make the story interesting and move it forward by dealing with what that means. Another way of thinking about this is that experienced improvisers feel safe enough to avoid the temptation of agreed activity. This kind of safety has also been identified as crucial to success in other creative fields, like software development. There, it's been recently discussed as psychological safety, and we're going to discuss it later in this chapter. Good improvisers and good development team members spot this pirate ship and understand that tackling it will move the story forward. Good directors of improvisation encourage improvisers to do this. Good directors, good managers of software development do the same. What's fascinating is that all novice improvisers seem to know that mopping the decks is the right thing to do. There isn't a long discussion. It happens in just a few seconds. What this shows is how good we all are at shying away from things that we perceive as dangerous and doing this quietly, subconsciously, and in agreement with others. We especially tend to avoid anything that will make us radically change our behavior or our ways of thinking. Johnston has one suggestion to help improvisers avoid this agreed activity: encouragement from the sidelines. He suggests that improvisers have a director who is watching from the side of the stage and can speak out and direct them during the show. The director spots which suggestions, which offers, like the pirate ship, will move the story forward. She also sees which suggestions are invitations to agreed activity and tells the actors to avoid them. Let's say a director is watching a scene where there's been a suggestion of washing the decks. She might allow the crew 10 seconds of deck washing without advancing the action. But then she will shout, "The decks are clean. The pirate ship is getting nearer. Deal with the pirate ship." Agreed activity is an understandable response to the need for safety, but it is something that teams, not just in improvised theatre, but also other creative endeavours, such as software development, need to avoid. And often the most effective way, if not the only way of achieving this, is through some kind of outside input and encouragement. So part of the skill of being a good improviser is knowing how to dodge this need to stay safe, or rather, knowing how to extend the feeling of safety so that it can take on the adventure. take on the adventure of the pirate ship. And part of the skill of being a good member of a development team is to know how to dodge this need to stay safe, or rather, knowing how to extend the feeling of psychological safety so that team members feel comfortable pointing out problems and spotting the pirate ships. And in both cases, support from the director and the audience are vital. Good software development teams spot problems and call them out so that they can be tackled. Good project managers help and encourage software teams to do this. They help the team avoid agreed activity and help teams to get out of agreed activity when they fall into its trap. But here might be a big difference between improvisation and software development. In improv, the audience want the improvisers to discover trouble and deal with it. But in software development, where is the audience? Who is it? Is it the senior stakeholders? Has the team ever seen them? Is it the users? Has the team ever seen or heard of them? Often the response of the audience of senior stakeholders to reports of bad news is either the equivalent of booing and hissing and throwing things, or even actively shouting, "Scrub the decks," or even worse, a stony silence. As we talk about in Chapter Swamp, one of the main jobs of the team and their project manager in a software development project is to connect with their audience or audiences. Imagine that in an improv show, one of the performers shouted, "Look, a pirate ship," and a director sitting next to the stage responded by saying, "Shut up about the pirate ship. I don't want to hear any more of this negative thinking. Clean the decks. Any more talk of a pirate ship and you're off the show." Good product owners and senior stakeholders don't shoot the messenger when someone from the team or the project manager reports that they've seen the software development equivalent of a pirate ship on the horizon. Why are they so often tempted to do so? Why are they so often tempted to do some, if not messenger shooting, at least messenger roughing up? Again, I think there's an explanation in the concept of psychological safety. If you're an agile project manager, it's important to understand that the agile approach to managing software development provides lots of opportunities for the project manager and the team to spot the pirate ship. Every day there's a stand-up meeting. The team talks about what they did the day before and what they're going to do today. In a stand-up, team members also talk about any problems they have that are blocking their progress. Reporting these blockers is the most important bit of any stand-up. Blockers are the project's pirate ships. Retrospectives at the end of the sprint provide a bigger chunk of time for the team to reflect on how things are going and call out anything that might cloud the horizon. But just because there are these regular opportunities doesn't mean anybody seizes them. If there's one big thing that's blocking progress, that might be the thing that no one talks about. Remember, agreed activity is instinctive. It often happens silently and instantly on stage, and the same in development teams. Maybe everyone has seen the pirate ship, but they're saying nothing. And there might not be an obvious Jolly Roger flying and the sound of "Arr, Jim lad." If you are the project manager, the way to find the pirate ship might be to look for agreed activity. If some members of the team have the same update with no variation for days in a row, that's a sign of agreed activity. Another sign is when the team plans a task and then it doesn't get done for days, weeks, or possibly months. Nobody on the team decides to pick it up. Maybe nobody has had a discussion within the team about why they don't want to pick up this task and tackle it. As with actors on the improv stage, they made an agreement, but that doesn't mean they have talked about it. Tacitly, they all agreed not to tackle the task. In these situations, it's the job of the project manager to point to that task and ask what there is about it that means everyone is avoiding it. Of course, it's best if the team learns for themselves. Of course, it's best if the team learns for themselves to avoid agreed activity, point out the pirate ships, and do their best to tackle them. But some problems can't be tackled by the team. They need outside help. Let's say the team identifies some problems. Then they explain to the leadership what those problems are. And then the leadership ignores them or gets angry or suggests that if the team knew how to do their jobs, there wouldn't be a problem. The team notices this. They understand. So they find an agreed activity, doing as they're told, doing exactly as they're told. They're smart people, so they learn almost straight away when it's better not to try and speak out or think for themselves. I worked as a coach on a fraud detection project for a bank. The project was really struggling. We had a retrospective. One big problem, an almighty big pirate ship, emerged. All the requirements for the project were written by a single business analyst. The team's main difficulty was that they couldn't understand what the business analyst had written. What struck me straight away was that the business analyst wasn't in any of the agile meetings, not in the stand-ups, not in planning, not in the retrospectives, and not in the show and tells. In an agile project, the business analyst is part of the team, not outside of the team sending in requirements, especially ones that cannot be understood. So my response to this problem was to suggest that the business analyst should be invited to all the agile meetings. This was where I noticed the developers looked at each other sideways. This is always a sign that you are finally getting to the real issue. We're not allowed to talk to the business analyst. What? That's crazy. I'm sure that can't be correct. Yes, it was crazy. Yes, it was correct. Well, it was totally incorrect, but that was what was happening. I tried to talk to the business analyst. I emailed him asking for a meeting. I got a phone call from his boss saying that I wasn't allowed to talk to him. And of course, there was no way that the project was going to get anywhere in its current state. The team needed, at the very least, to talk to the person who could tell them what the product was supposed to do. My suggestion was that we get the business analyst to sit with the team and to attend stand-ups and retrospectives. When this finally happened, progress on the project started to improve. After the minor victory of getting the business analyst to sit with the team, I then suggested that we start to have show and tell meetings. For the previous 2 weeks, the team had been doing some work on the user interface for one of the very early scenes in one of the fraud reporting journeys. Early screens, sorry, not early scenes. A developer put up the first screen in the journey. She started to talk it through. Even though most people who were on the conference call were on mute, I thought I detected a change in the silence. Finally, someone said, I thought we'd agreed that we were going to arrange the cases by account holder, not by account number. The developer who was demonstrating the screen looked slightly panicked. The business analyst, who he'd only just set eyes on and had just joined the team, started to look worried and scroll wildly through the requirements document. No, it's in the requirement that cases should be arranged by account number, he said. Another awkward pause on the conference call. But that makes no sense, someone joined in. It's the people who are victims of fraud, not just individual accounts, added a different voice. We need to see all the accounts that a customer has, and we need to see the activity across all their accounts for this screen to make any sense, said another voice. Yes, that's right. The structure of this project had been wrong from the very beginning. This problem hadn't been detected through months and months of analysis. Or had it? Had somebody known that this would be a problem and just not said anything? My guess is that a lot of people knew. This story shows the power of the show and tell to unearth problems. But obviously, if someone had noticed this problem earlier, and my strong suspicion is that someone had, it would have been much better for them to have pointed it out just as soon as they did. Maybe they tried. Maybe they were smacked down and instantly learned never to point out anything ever again. If you do stand-ups every working day with your team, if you do retrospectives and show and tells every sprint, you will find out what the problems are. If you treat the problems that are reported seriously and you do your best to deal with them, the team will notice that. They'll feel safer and they'll report more. Conversely, if you don't have these meetings, if you don't show that you're interested in finding out the problems, then the team will understand that too. Not having stand-ups, not having retrospectives and show and tells is like shouting at your team, scrub the decks, don't look at the pirate ship. So by now we've made it clear that for a project to have a good chance of success, we should encourage the team members to point out any problems that they encounter. And with the idea of agreed activity, we've also cautioned that sometimes there may be a problem that the team is instinctively avoiding, that we need to encourage them to tell us about. Finding out what the problems are in a project, bringing them to light so that there's a chance they can be addressed, we might think that this would take us a lot of the way towards being able to make any project far more possible than impossible. And it would if it weren't for one slight complication. How to avoid getting shot. Highlighting the problems that a project throws up can be threatening to the senior people involved in that project. What if the problem that comes to light is something that they haven't thought of or they don't know how to fix? They will be inclined to avoid addressing it, possibly by attacking or threatening the team for daring to raise the issue. In software development, it's very common for members of development teams to do the right thing. In software development, it's very common for members of development to do the right thing and point out the problems. They do the equivalent of shouting, "Look, a pirate ship." But often the response of senior people who should acknowledge these problems and thank those who point them out is instead something like, "You're wrong, it's not there." Other ways of responding that are just as bad are, "I'm tired of this negativity," or "Maybe you're not up to the job if you think that's a pirate ship." And that's why people don't raise problems and instead just wash the decks. This looks like a paradox, doesn't it? The people who you would think would most want the project to succeed, the people who had the original idea, the senior stakeholders who back it, are the ones who most risk making it fail by discussing the reporting of problems. Why on earth would they do that? Remember how we explained deck scrubbing on the improvisational stage. Scared people try to make themselves safe, even if what they're doing is making the group less safe, even if it undermines their collective aims. And managers and senior stakeholders are people. Often the problems that the team uncover threaten their safety, and so senior people will instinctively do things to try to make themselves safe, even when those things undermine the projects that they claim passionately to want and need. For a moment, let's put ourselves in the shoes of someone who has managed to persuade the board to back her project. As part of the process of arranging the funding, she has probably overstated the benefits and understated the risks and costs. Anybody who's ever completed a grant proposal or a project bid will know how often these formal processes encourage exactly this kind of overstating. If the process is informal, if the project has been the result of just a few brief conversations, it might be that the gap between the vague, shiny statement and the reality of what can be done is huge. Is there anything that we can do to resolve this paradox? Completely resolve it? Probably not. But there are probably some aspects of it that, if we understand them better, can allow us to manage it more effectively. And I'm going to talk about those now: psychological safety and status transactions. In recent years, the concept of psychological safety has been developed and popularized. It states in a more formal way something that Johnston was investigating in his experiments with improvisers, and something that we were talking about when we were talking about improvisation. Safety isn't just about physical safety. We also need psychological safety. And when we don't have it, we will change our position and behavior until we do. Psychological safety proposes that there are 4 basic levels of safety that sit one on top of the other. The idea is that a team member needs level 1 before they can think about level 2, and so on. Idea is. Level 1 has been allowed in the group, inclusion safety. Level 2 has been allowed to learn in the group, learning safety. Level 3 is being allowed to contribute to the group, contribution safety. Level 4 is being allowed to challenge what the group are doing, challenger safety. Timothy R. Clark outlines these in his book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. First of all, it's important to understand that one stage of psychological safety needs to be built on top of another. it's unlikely that anyone will be able to learn in the group if they aren't allowed to be a member. And from that point of view of our metaphor of the pirate ship, it looks like we really need to be at the top of this staircase, all the way up at level 3 or 4, before as a crew member we can comfortably shout, "Hey, look, a pirate ship." For Clarke, fostering psychological safety in creative terms is about trying to do two things at the same time. In a problem-solving team, we need disagreements. We need different ideas. As Clarke puts it, we need to increase intellectual friction, but at the same time, we don't want to spend all our time falling out, storming off, and getting upset with each other. Again, as Clarke puts it, we need to decrease social friction. This is extremely familiar to many of us who have worked as project managers. When I'm working with a team, I find myself very often having to point out that there are disagreements, intellectual friction, and reassure the team that this is okay, and this doesn't have to result in anyone falling out. Social friction. Easier, much easier said than done. This connects with another idea that Clarke discusses, the idea that psychological safety is about the relationship between cover and candor. The more reassurance that the leader of a team can provide that there won't be any negative effects for being honest, the more honest team members will be. The more cover the leader provides, the more candor she will get from her team. But there are two difficulties I have with the idea of fostering psychological safety as a full solution to the problem of the pirate ship. Firstly, I'm skeptical of the idea that creative problem-solving situations are ever going to be truly safe, because the level of safety in the team and the individual is dynamic. It's either being increased or reduced on an ongoing basis. At the point where any member of the team tries to increase their level of safety, minor typo there, my hunch is that there is always going to be a potential conflict between doing the right thing in terms of pointing out the pirate ship and being safe. If you point out the pirate ship, you run the risk not only of being shouted down or ignored, but even possibly kicked out of the team. Also, there is a chicken and egg aspect to this. If nobody ever took a risk without feeling totally safe, nobody would ever find themselves supported in taking that risk, and then in future feel safer in that kind of situation when they encounter it again. Here we can see that psychological safety is dynamic and fragile. It needs to be continually shored up and supported. Second, there's someone or maybe several people missing from this story about who needs to feel safe. The boss or even the bosses. The sponsor of this project, the senior stakeholders who backed her. Yes, increasing psychological safety for the team makes it more likely that the team will contribute and challenge. But what about the boss? Is she part of the team, or is she part of an entirely different organizational setup? What is her role in that team? Is she trying to get her feet under the table and just get inclusion safety? Is she trying to learn the ropes, or is she really at the point where she can say to other people in her peer group, "My team have identified this problem. It's something all your teams must also be experiencing. I'm surprised you haven't mentioned it." Or, "I think we made a mistake. We didn't expect this problem that we've now unearthed, and we're going to need to spend extra effort to fix it. That's going to mean a substantial delay." For your boss, these might be uncomfortable and uncertain things to say. What if your boss doesn't have challenger safety in the group that she's in? If she isn't at the point where she can say things she needs to say in whatever forum she operates in, then we have a problem. We all have a problem. Status transactions and the snafu principle. This is an important thing to understand. The boss is in a different team, and in that team, the boss isn't the boss. This helps explain something that I'd known for a long time, but hadn't really understood. It's what the writer Robert Anton Wilson calls the snafu principle. Adequate communication flows freely between equals. Communication between non-equals is warped and distorted by domination and submission rules. Sorry, I'm going to have a go at the whole quotation again. Adequate communication flows freely between equals. Communication between non-equals is warped and distorted by domination and submission rituals, perpetuating communication jam. In fact, it's worse than Robert Anton Wilson imagines, because communication doesn't even flow freely between equals, especially in the senior ranks of an organization, or in fact, in any level in an organization where people might be jostling for position. What does this mean? It means, yes, it's right to avoid agreed activity. Yes, it's right for members of a team to point out problems. It's right to stop mopping the deck and tackle the pirate ship. But it also means that what happens as a result of acknowledging the problems is always going to be vulnerable. It's going to be vulnerable to being warped and distorted by whatever power structures the team, the boss, and her bosses are involved in. When we're in the process of pointing out the pirate ship and expecting senior stakeholders to help us tackle it, it's extremely useful to understand that the boss might be in a team where she doesn't have psychological safety. Of course, that may lead her to be unable to admit, let alone deal with the problems that we're bringing to light. So now what do? We think about this in terms of status. For inspiration, let's go back to Keith Johnston's book, Impro. Johnston had been trying to get the students that he was working with to have a natural sounding conversation on stage. He tried all kinds of things and hadn't managed to get anything to work. Finally, after another day of struggle, he went home and turned on the TV. There was a program by the biologist and writer Desmond Morris. Morris was talking about a community of chimpanzees. He explained that pretty much everything that chimps do, who they sit with, who they eat with, and of course who they have sex with, can be explained as a status transaction. When one chimp grooms another, the chimp that is doing the grooming is affirming that they are lower in status than the chimp that gets groomed. The point that Morris made in the TV program was that most of these status exchanges aren't huge. There are very few fights involved. There isn't much chest beating. The status exchanges are tiny, fractional indications of who is higher and lower status, who sits highest on the tree, who has their hair picked for fleas first, when two near equals agree to pick through each other's fur. How these questions are answered shows the precise status of all the chimps in the group. The next day, Johnston went back to his drama studio and asked his students to improvise scenes. He had only one instruction for his students. Whatever one person said, the other should try to lift themselves or lower themselves, just slightly, in status with their reply. I'll try that sentence again. Whatever one person said, the other person should try to lift themselves or lower themselves just slightly in status with their reply. Johnston was delighted with the results. Suddenly his students were having conversations that sounded like the way people normally talked. Are you going away anywhere nice for your holidays? Tahiti. Oh, that sounds amazing. I'd love to go to Tahiti. Well, my husband is working out in the South Pacific, so it's easier if I go out and holiday near where he is. Are you going anywhere nice? Ibiza. Oh, I love Ibiza. We used to go there all the time before we had the kids. It's my first time. Oh, I'm sure you'll love it. Okay, now read this again. Who is high status? And what does the high status person do to slightly lower their status? Does this sound like a realistic conversation? Think of a conversation that you've had recently with a friend or colleague. Who was lower status, just fractionally? Who was higher status? Now let's come back to the business of bad news and taking problems to the boss. The difficulty that project managers are always wrestling with is that bad news is humbling and threatening. A conversation where bad news is given and received is a status transaction. Johnston's insight, and Robert Anton Wilson's, is that in real life, nearly everything is a status transaction. This makes life difficult for project managers and for their bosses, but it explains a lot of the negative and unhelpful behavior that we see from bosses when they get bad news. It also explains why so many teams recognize the bad news and then instinctively tell nobody about it. And it explains why kings shoot messengers. They shoot messengers because in that moment, when the messenger arrives and spills the bad news, the messenger is radically lowering the status of the king. This is an intolerable situation for the king, but in that moment, he can easily solve his status problem. Sure, the battle is lost, but to recover his status and show that he's still the king, he can have the messenger shot. What we've established from the beginning of this chapter is that the best chance you have of making your project a success is to tackle the pirate ships that you and your team see on the horizon. We've also established senior stakeholders tend to be resistant to bad news, and part of the reason for this is the connection between receiving bad news and status. As a project manager, your job is managing this contradiction, but once we understand it, there are some approaches that suggest themselves. Do it in private. One of the mistakes that the messenger who got shot made was delivering the bad news in front of an audience. In private, the threat to status is reduced. The person receiving the bad news has far more outs, far more ways of dealing with a situation without losing status or face. Do it as part of an existing relationship. The better your relationship, the more that boss already trusts you, the more chance there is that they will believe what you're saying and act on it, even if what you're telling them doesn't make them feel psychologically safe and lowers their status. Try to get a one-on-one meeting with them regularly. Try to meet them in informal settings. Taking 10 minutes every week to talk them through the weekly report is good, but at least every sprint, typically every 2 weeks, you should be having a face-to-face, and lunch every now and then, and maybe they can join you and the team for a drink after work sometimes. Try to find the Goldilocks status. As we've heard from Robert Anton Wilson and Keith Johnston, pointing out problems to people who are senior to you is always going to involve a status transaction. In my experience, if you go in with too low a status as a humble servant who's just pointing out the problems they've found, you make it much too easy to swat you away. If you come in at equal status or above, you make the entire conversation about smacking down your status and reasserting the hierarchy. So what you're trying to find, remembering again Keith Johnston's investigations in improvisation, is a way of transacting with a smaller difference in status as possible, but always coming in slightly lower. User-generated artifacts. This may feel a bit sneaky, but it works. Don't try to tell the boss anything. Show them. What's the problem that's being reported by the development team? Given current progress, when is the project predicted to finish? Well, would you look at that? Seems it's going to take twice as long as we expected. Who'd have thought it? Connect with commitment and consistency. This is a very flawed idea. Connect with commitment and consistency. There is a very flawed idea that project management is about keeping promises. There are lots of things wrong with this idea, and we'll explore those in chapter commitment. There are also no positive aspects of this kind of view of project management. But one of them is that there are almost no positive aspects of this kind of view of project management. But one of them is that if senior people seek a commitment from you to develop their project on time, typically, then you should also use that opportunity to get a commitment from them. Yes, as a project manager, you're going to do your best to commit to the deadline. But can you get a commitment from them that when problems arise that can't be addressed by the team, they will listen to you? Can you get a commitment that when these issues need escalating, they will do what is required to escalate them? Try bringing someone in of similar status. There is no alternative but to bring someone in who can look them in the eye on a level status and explain there is a problem. Is there someone who's on your side who is of the same status as the senior stakeholders that you're trying to talk to? Could you ask them to have a quiet word? It's a sentence that makes no sense. As much as you can understand the landscape, struggling in here. As much as you can understand the landscape, what team is your boss or your boss's boss part of? What's going on? Is there a reorg? Is there a merger? Did another project fail and that means that this project is in the spotlight? Who cares about this project? Who's annoyed it's happening? This is something that we'll talk a lot more about in chapter Swamp. Finally, be comfortable in tension, but maintain the tension. A mistake that I frequently made earlier in my career was to expect the reporting of problems to result in immediate action. Even more ambitiously, visible immediate action. There may be all kinds of reasons why this isn't possible. There may be other blockages, other timing issues that you can't see. That means simply reporting a problem doesn't mean that the process of immediately solving it can be set in motion. Still, it's important to keep these problems visible and in the minds of those who have a chance of Still, it's important to keep these problems visible and in the minds of those who have a chance of either solving them or putting them in the hands of someone who can. To summarize, teams will instinctively avoid pointing out trouble. They will tend towards agreed activity. This is especially true if anybody in the team has had experience of a negative response when they pointed out bad news in the past. As a project manager, it's your job to encourage the team to call out problems when they see them. It's also your job to spot the agreed activity. Places where the team seem to be working but not making any progress. If there's a problem there that nobody's talking about, you need to help bring it to light. Some problems can't be fixed by the team. They need to be escalated to people outside of the team. They need to be reported to the bosses, and they need the help of the bosses to be fixed. But problems and bad news can be threatening to bosses. Look for ways to talk to the bosses about the project's problems in ways that don't threaten the boss's status. Do it in private. Do it as part of an ongoing conversation that isn't always about bad news. Understand that you can't get this right every time. Understand that you don't have a complete picture of the stresses and strains that they are under in their own team, nor how psychologically safe they feel in that team. But also understand that this is the real job of the project manager, maintaining relationships with senior stakeholders and finding ways of telling them things that they don't want to hear, but the project needs them to hear. It's also about keeping these projects to mind and visible to senior people, even if they can't see a way of solving them immediately. In the next chapter, we'll return to this idea of the importance of visibility for the managing of successful projects. Okay. Stop there.